is going to be the tutorial on how to use numbers. All right, for project number 1. If you don't have Excel, don't worry about buying it or downloading it. If you have a MacBook, numbers is very identical to Excel, a little bit easier to use. All right, so first thing we need to do is go ahead and go log into MySevern, go to the Algebra 1 page. We're going to have to go to the topics page for our project, which is the first tile, Project 1 Linear Equations. Here, we're going to go ahead and download our data. So I have one here for Excel. That's not the one we want. We're going to go ahead and use numbers for Mac. Go ahead and click it. You're going to have to make sure you download it and save it to your desktop. All right, if you take a look, everything that is color-coded is what we'll be using for this project. We have years, CO2, and the temperature. Notice the yellow box. It says years since 1959. I decided to go with years since 1959 because, well, 1959 would equal 0, 1960 would equal 1, so on and so forth. This is going to make it easier when we go to write linear equations, since here, this is 0, that any value that correlates that's going to be my y-intercept. 0, 315.97, that would be my y-intercept. All right, so let's go ahead and graph. I'm only going to do part 1. It's going to be very similar for part 2 and part 3. All right, so let's go up to chart. Let's click our XY scatter plot. We can either do this one with the crosshairs or we could do the bubble plot. It's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and choose the crosshairs. So take a look that our chart is trying to graph our data automatically. However, this is not exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and click the points and go ahead and delete. This is going to refresh the chart. All right, so what we're going to do now is add chart data. It appears that nothing happened. However, our box went away and it's telling me to select cells in any table to add data to this chart. What I'm going to do is my X value first, which is years. I'm going to use the click, hold, and drag. Click on 0, hold down, and drag all the way to the very last year. And let go. Now I have to select my Y value. I'm going to click on the very first one, hold, drag all the way down. Make sure you get every single cell. If you take a look, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the graph to exit out. If you take a look, the y-axis is now years since 1959, and my y-axis is CO2. All right. What we want to do now is try to make it a better looking graph by eliminating all of this empty space underneath our data. So if you take a look, the minimum is almost 300. My maximum looks to be around 410. So what I'm going to do to make it a little bit better looking a graph is I'm going to graph my y-axis from 300 all the way up to, I'm going to go to 450. All right, so let's click on the graph itself. We'll have a bunch of options appear on the right. We're going to go to axis. All right, notice how we have two options, one for X values, one for our Y values. We're going to have to do it for each one. So first, let's go ahead and do our X, and we're going to give it an axis name, and it appears below. While I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and scale it automatically as is. All right, so we're going from 0 to 60, or 1959 until 60 years after. Let's go to our Y value. Right. While I'm here, I'm going to give it an axis name. It appears. And now I can go ahead and scale my y-axis. Remember, I said minimum, I'm going to put at 300. I'm going to have my maximum go to 450. And see what that looks like. Much better. I could go ahead and decrease the amount if I like. It's totally up to you. Let's say 425. That looks pretty good. All right, so now we have our X label, we have our X title, we have our Y title. We still need a chart title. This is not going to be our chart title. All right, I'm going to go back to chart in the top right. I'm going to get rid of my legend by unclicking it, and I'm going to instead click title. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. Now I can double click on any one of these titles to edit it. So my x-axis, I'm going to double click and change it. I'm going to say years since 1959. Double click my Y title. It's going to be carbon dioxide or CO2, carbon dioxide. And don't forget my units, ppm, which stands for parts per million. If you're interested in finding out what this is, what kind of units and why, feel free to take a look at the links in mySevern. All right, let's double click the graph title. I'm just going to do years versus CO2. Feel free to make it anything you want. All right, and there we have it. We successfully graphed part 1. We have a title on both the Y and the X axis. We have our chart, and it's looking pretty good. A couple other things that you could do, which is totally up to you, is if I click on the graph, notice how there's no Y axis. We could go to axis easily and select anything that we want. So I'm going to click axis line to make it look a little bit better. All right, I could do major grid lines, which is already on. I could do minor grid lines. It's totally up to you. Same thing with my X. Notice how we have no vertical lines, right? I could easily go ahead and change my grid lines. I could change my minor lines to add more lines. It's totally up to you. All right, let's say I make it dotted here. I'll make my minor dotted for this one as well. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out and see what it looks like. It's a pretty good looking graph. All right, I hope this helps. Again, this is only for part 1. It's going to be a similar method for the remainder of the project. Reminder, you should have 3 graphs. Part 1, years versus CO2. Part 2, years versus temperature. And part 3, CO2 versus temperature. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or go to mySevern to the topics page for project 1 and post your question there so the entire class can see. Thanks.